allow our educators to become world-class researchers, right? So our system, our higher education is designed to really promote and encourage groundbreaking research. And to take risk in doing that, and that is with our tenure track. That's the idea of it as well, is that they have the freedom to take risks, to um, uh, have patience, and to do the real hard research. So I would say it's about the encouragement of going after those areas, particularly areas that others haven't been into.
Okay. Now, in that case, since you are in India and then you have experienced some of the places in India, uh, can you just compare the higher education system in India with USA? And if at all you compare, what are the differences that you find?
Um, so a lot of similarities actually, as what I'm recognizing right now. I mean, just in my bit of experience, I think the gosh, students, or you want me to look at the camera? Students tend to be highly engaged, very motivated, very conscientious about wanting to learn and achieve. I think that's pretty common that we see. Um, but similarities, I would say, enormous amount of similarities. I think because I haven't actually, I'm coming here giving my lectures. I haven't actually seen the how other lectures and are formed and structured, and what students are learning to do. But I know that in the U.S. we have, at least within our business school at my university, moved into, as opposed to giving students all the information, creating ways in which they come to those answers on their own. Um, so facilitating the learning as opposed to divulging the learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, fine.
So.
Thank you for your answer. Now, coming to the economic structure in USA. So, recently, what are the trends that you are able to observe, especially after the crisis, that is 2007-8 crisis? So, in terms of the wage system and the uh, structure of the economy, considering the agriculture, primary sector, industries, and services, what are the recent trends?
What was the last
Recent trends, like what are the changes that are
that
taking
we
place
see?
in these sectors?
Um, Gosh, well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in all those areas, but I think that um, what we the positives that came out of the 2008 uh, financial crisis is we did see a big movement into certain areas, like let's take the financial industry. The creation of the Consumer Protection Bureau. And what we've recognized is that growth without regulation isn't um, the good of all. There is such thing as there's no such thing as too big to fail. I think that's been proven. So I think after the crisis, there was particularly in the financial industry, but across the board, a lot more attention to regulatory policies, like how do we prevent things from happening, where have we missed the ball, and what do we need to keep our eyes on. And that, in spite of the opposition to those ideas saying this is not going to help, it's only going to hurt, right? Regulation creates barriers. I would say it's done the opposite, right? We've seen such a tremendous rebound in a lot of ways. We've had increased regulations in our environmental policies as well during that time. And I think the focus on the regulatory areas in these industries actually spurred the economic growth that we're experiencing today. What's interesting right now is that we have an administration that has a very different look and take on that, and are actually rolling back a lot of those industries. So, in the financial
Area.
area, in environmental protection areas that affect all sectors and whatnot. So, it's a little concerning. I think the other area that, from our economy, what we recognize is that while we did a good job of rebounding industry, not everybody has recovered at the same rate. And so there's a lot of discussion right now on how do we reach back and pull um, uh, the larger population into it. So while we are seeing historic high stock market values and indexes, we've seen stagnant wage growth. We have seen, while unemployment rates are lower than they were pre-financial crisis, we see that there's it hasn't been equal jobs in relation. Lower paying jobs have filled that more than the higher paying jobs that were there before. So I think we have a lot more work to do on a micro level, making sure that individuals are reaping the benefits from a lot of this.
Okay, thank you. In continuation with that, next question is, how do you comment on the political economy of the current administration that you have in USA? Because there are a lot of anti-immigration tendencies, and that is how it is affecting the labor
Yeah.
market in USA. So, what is your comment on that?
So what's interesting about I think what's happening in the U.S. with the current administration is not dissimilar to what we're seeing happen worldwide. And look at Brexit, look at other countries where you're seeing those kind of anti-immigration policies emerge, even here. I think if what's the irony here is that this is probably the biggest disconnect between private industry and our government right now is private industry understands, and this is across sectors. So our tech sector is saying we're not getting the best and brightest minds that we need to work, right? You have our agricultural sector saying we can't continue to sustain our business model without immigration. We have your healthcare sector. Every sector recognizes. I think private industry recognizes the benefits of immigration on a larger scale than our government. And I think that the issue that we're experiencing with immigration right now is a bit of a scapegoat to, if we were to track back to, all the people from 2008 that haven't recovered at the same rate as our large or more wealthy population, they're feeling really disenfranchised. And I think you had a political party come in and say, address that issue directly, and they filled the void by saying, and these are the reasons. So I think it's unfortunate. I believe that immigration is necessary for economic growth everywhere, but clearly there is a feeling out there that there has to be some control. People feel out of control with the pace of things right now.
Okay.
So finding some
So
balance.
then, will you say that this kind of anti-immigration policy is going against the American ethos,
Yeah.
or the values that the American society
Yes.
has?
Yeah.
So then, what are the social responses? How the civil society is responding to this kind of anti-immigration stand of the government?
I think that this is where we see the biggest, a lot of the divisiveness in the U.S. right now. I think part of what has created it is that you have viewpoints that are fear-mongering about immigration. They're creating a lot of fear that if you think things are bad now, it will only get worse if we don't stop people from coming in and taking jobs and committing crimes and using up your social benefits. So things will get worse. So there's fear mongering, saying that that's kind of what happens as a result of immigration. There's economic fears being spread that jobs will be lost. Your financial security is at risk if you allow people to come in and take your job. But I think there's a larger contingent in the U.S. right now that is so upset that this is the direction, and the way I think America is the economic superpower that it is because of immigration. Unless you are a Native American, you have somebody has immigrated here and has made things better. And I think that there has been studies shown that the net benefit of immigration has been positive. It's been positive. There's been a net benefit from immigration. Even if you consider some areas that might have lost jobs, other jobs have been created, and areas of opportunity that there's been a net benefit from it. So the fear mongering that's happened isn't even accurate.
Okay, but then what about the majority of the people who were supporting the Trump administration to kind of push forward that anti-immigration stand of the government? So then, is there really a conflict between the civil societies, or what is that general kind of consensus about the
No, it's a real
this thing?
conflict right now. I mean, you have people on very different sides. You have people that fear immigration from a safety and security standpoint, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of our immigration policies, while not the overt statement, um, are anti-Muslim areas, right, and anti-South American areas. So I think there's some. So people we since 9/11, feeding into people's fear of terrorist attacks and opportunities. They've blamed that on immigration, where what you find is very little terrorist activity has ever happened from immigration or come from an immigrant. But that plays into the fear that people have, and then economic security. So I think between those two things, you have a large community of people that say, I feel economically unsafe and I feel physically unsafe in the world that today. And we have a party that's come in and said, well, here's why, and here's who you can blame for that. And so it's been easy for them to fall in line with. But then you have half of the country, the other half of the country, that says that is not the case, and it is anti our value system. As not that it's just not, it's anti who we are as Americans and how we define ourselves. It's also not within our economic interest. Like our growth depends on bringing in immigration.
Right.
But there is real divisiveness, I would say, in the country right now. You do have people on both sides of that issue.
Okay. Now, here's a basic question that being a very typical capitalist country, USA, is it not going against the capitalist stance? Because capitalism is expecting lot of flexibility and also the liberal kind of setup. And now, with this new administration and also anti-immigrant stand of the government, it is going against that. Don't you feel so?
Um, I think, yeah, that's the reality of it. Absolutely, we're acting not within our economic interest by doing these things. But I think the larger thing that it plays into is this the nationalist movement that we're seeing happening everywhere. Because of all these insecurities, we see a lot of people being far more tribal, and this is happening here. It's happening in Europe. And I think that is really the overriding sentiment, or what driver is this feeling of national interest, and that they do believe that this is our national. We got to take care of ourselves. We got to insulate. We got to isolate, and that is. There's an enormous amount of research out there that says that's not what you do to create economic growth, which is anti-capitalistic, but yet we have this whole national movement happening right now. It's a really interesting juxtaposition, really. Yeah.
Okay, but then since there is a lot of ideological change that is happening, how the academia and other social classes, how they are responding to this, like people from academia like you or artists, or what is the kind of response of these people?
Yeah, so
belonging to different sections, maybe you can
so
say.
right, I would say that we there is a sense that we have our more conservative population would say that universities are far more liberal leaning, and we tend to find that more intellectuals don't have nationalistic views. So I would say how academia is responding, overwhelmingly, I think you find they see it very differently than the current administration. Yeah.
Okay, but then I mean, according to my observations, we have the same kind of situation in India, because we also have this nationalistic movement, and a lot of people are. I mean, they are trying to support the government, but the academia and intellectuals, as you said, they are against the policies, because
Right.
right now we also have CA in India, NPR issue. The
Mm-hmm.
government is also trying to impose the. They are trying to create that kind of atmosphere, which is
Right.
again anti-immigration. So similar situation is
Sure.
found
Yeah.
in many countries, and we have seen that what happens with Brexit in
Yeah.
European Union. So
Yeah.
I think that has become a global trend now, that
Yes.
people want to isolate themselves from, and they don't want that multicultural atmosphere as such, because there are a lot of issues associated with that. So
Well, I think I think that's because it all stems from economic insecurity, right? All of
hmm,
this has been about these countries or people within these countries saying, there's just not enough. There's not enough to go around, and the reaction has been then to, well, let's at least take care of ourselves, and that is, I think, very short term and more of an emotional reaction, but it's happening globally. But a short term solution to um, something that's going to not give very long term benefits. But yeah, I think that's what we're seeing is. But I think it stems from the economic insecurity that was created. I think we all experienced a lot of global growth for a long time. Then
hmm,
the crisis happened. It disproportionately affected different
different
areas,
countries, yeah.
and there's been a response in the recovery that this we have to take care of our own before we try to this idea that we're going to be able to be everywhere, be a larger team player in the global society. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. One more question, that considering the kind of economic growth USA has seen for a long time, and being an economic superpower, there's a lot of emphasis on the services sector as compared to agriculture, which is primary, and so on. So currently, what is that situation? I mean, what is the economic situation of the agriculture or primary sector in USA?
So our largest service sector is our largest employment sector is service, uh, without a doubt. And while I think we have moved from we're in a knowledge based economy right now in the U.S. I would say is where things are. What was your question though?
So the
The
agriculture
impact?
sector
Oh yeah.
situation, and basically the farmers in
Yeah, is
USA.
is shrinking, right? We see the consolidation of farming. I wouldn't say it's definitely not a major source of employment. A lot of our employment in that sector is relying on migrant employment, but it's not a growing sector for us for sure. I don't think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
again we share the same thing
Yeah.
in India, that we also have lot of problems in the agriculture sector. Okay, now moving on to the trade sector. Right now, there is a kind of conflict between USA and China as far as the trade,
Yeah.
say terms of trade are concerned. So then, what is that basic issue? I mean, how do you look at the trade conflict between China and USA?
So I think the conflicts between they're real valid issues, trade issues as it relates to China. Um, the suppression of their currency, their lack of ability to protect intellectual properties, right? Um, Corporate espionage, like those are real serious issues. The the issuance of or the use of tariffs to address those, I think, is not necessarily the most effective tool in to do that. I think collectively what we understand are tariffs affect consumers, right, more than anybody else. It's not going to be corporately resolved anywhere. That's going to be it's a tax that gets passed on not to the supplying countries but to the consumers. So I think it's created a lot of self-inflicted wounds. Our agriculture industry has been really struggling as a result of it. and the reality is China's a really important partner with us. I think that there were more diplomatic and more eloquent ways of maybe dealing with it, but there's a lot of people that this has really hurt, and I think, in my opinion, that China can wait it out a whole lot longer than the U.S. can, because I think it has really hurt too many sectors across the board, and they're only going to withstand those tariffs for so long. It's really affected
So,
their
is there
business.
economic insecurity about the Chinese products that are, I mean, the sections of the industry that is occupied by Chinese products, or
Well, we,
something else? I
I
mean,
mean, we rely so much on products we get from China, but it's really also it's less impacted the products that we're bringing in for China, and more what China did in retaliation to our tariffs, right? So the that's just been such a big market for so many of our companies, and it just went away like that. And that's a hard stop to any businesses, that the demand just gets scaled back so quickly. So I think, again, the things that we need to work on with China in a more diplomatic way is the prevention of the manipulation of currency to create unfair trade imbalances, or competition with our businesses. But I will give you an example. I think one of the areas where manufacturing, where we think that this will stop jobs from going, or products being manufactured in China, like companies taking over. Beyond just the low cost of labor of the Chinese labor market, it's really the speed and agility of their labor force that makes it so much more valuable. That our labor force just we can't compete with in that way, and that's not going to be fixed by tariffs.
okay. So then it is again a matter of how your policies, I mean, they are designed and they are moving in that direction. But then in this way, if the trade restrictions are imposed, then aren't we going against the idea of free trade? And if it is
Which is
not the
supposed to be, yeah.
free trade, but then the entire global trade will be shrinking in this particular manner. And USA, if the trend starts from there and it comes from there, then very soon other countries will also follow the suit. So then how do you look at the global trade, say in future 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think I think the movement of goods and services and people has an overall net benefit for sure. I think part of what the speed of which that those things can happen now, being a little bit more mindful as we get into agreements that there are shared wins on both sides of the aisle are critically important. I think part of, again, most of it stems from the economic insecurity of our employment sector. So let's talk about part of, I think the majority of our concerns with these free trade has been the impact it's had on our manufacturing sector, right? Just the loss of jobs. And there hasn't been, it's been our loss of jobs in manufacturing I would argue it's a combination of these free trade agreements, but also, and probably more importantly, technological advances in these processes. But we went from this was our highest employment sector to one of our lowest employment sectors, and very little transition. I think what we need to do is we need to have plans and policies in place on how do we start moving, because beyond, I think, these international trades, our next big job crisis is coming from AI. AI is going to affect 100% of all these jobs, and it will have the same type of damaging effect that these movement of functions of business offshoring on a greater scale in areas that we typically, in skilled areas, so I think what we really should be focusing on is what's our transition plan and how are we preparing, giving people the skills they're going to need, getting them reskilled now. Um, not waiting till it happens and then trying to figure out what to do, and transitioning somebody from a certain job to something that's completely different isn't something that can happen overnight. So I wish there was a little bit longer term policies in place about how do we reskill workers for that new environment, the AI environment that's coming.
Okay, just last question
Mm.
now. Keeping in mind the history of USA and Russia, how are the dynamics between Russia and USA now?
I would say they're uh, while they've been pretty amicable for many decades, after the Cold War falling, they are probably at the worst it's been since then. We have a lot of issues with Russia interfering with our elections, um, and our previous elections continuing to do so. We have, their involvement in our politics, and it appears, and I'm not an expert in this area, but what it appears is that they are having a hand in all everywhere where you see a lot of this instability and this push towards nationalistic points of view. There seems to be element activity from Russia in that, whether
Oh,
it's fanning the flames of these feelings, but I think they're really concerning right now. I think it's a tense time for America and Russia. It should be more tense, but we have a president that I think is a little bit more um, favorable or less concerned or sees it as less problematic because it aligns a little bit more with his personal ideology. And that's problematic because we're not addressing it or let alone stopping it. We're not even taking defensive measures, let alone proactive measures to put Russia back in its place. But yeah.
thank you so much for answering all my random questions,
Alice?
running from agriculture to politics and from politics to international politics. Thank you so much,
Yeah, it was
Professor
my
Singh.
pleasure. Thank you for
Thank you
having
so
me.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.